looking at it from a fixed pie perspective is what the industry has been doing before. Now it's a never-ending pie. Nobody owns the full space, and I really love the part of innovating, figuring out how this industry will be moving forward.
Hi, I'm Rob Sadow, and you're listening to the Flex Perspectives podcast, where we interview the world's best thinkers, researchers, and operators on how to make flexible work work. Flex Perspectives is brought to you by FlexIndex, the leading global insight platform for flexible work. FlexIndex covers flexible work strategies for more than 10,000 companies across 75,000 office locations and 100 million people. Today, my guest is Henrik Jarleskog. Henrik is an executive responsible for future of work at Sodexo, one of the 20 largest employers in the world. In this episode, Henrik talks about Sodexo's journey with flexible work and how the shift toward more dynamic office usage has impacted the business. He shares how Sodexo is partnering with and advising clients to maximize the experience of the office and where he sees hybrid work headed in the coming years. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us out by subscribing and giving us a rating. Helps us understand what episodes our listeners find most valuable and helps new listeners find the podcast.
This episode of Flex Perspectives is brought to you by Office Benchmarks. In today's hybrid world, workplace executives face critical lease and space allocation decisions. Make the wrong move and it could cost millions, impact productivity, and hurt retention. You need reliable data, not news headlines. That's why companies like TD Bank, Southwest, and Chime rely on Office Benchmarks. Office Benchmarks is the only solution that combines flexible work policy and office usage metrics to help workplace leaders compare their footprint, space design, and usage to peers with similar policies. Get started today at flexindex.com.
Today, I'm incredibly excited to have Henrik Jarleskog on the podcast.
Thank you very much. Great pronunciation of my name as well.
It's funny because I was quite worried about that. And I was like, if I'm going to get it right or not, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, I guess you hear it too sometimes that people have problems with your last name, do they?
I think about 99 out of every 100 who go with Sadow or Shadow or something else. And so I never make anyone feel bad if they don't get it right. It's like once in a blue moon that it actually works correctly.
So we go with Henrik and Rob today.
I think that sounds probably easiest. So Henrik, I believe congratulations are in order. You've got some exciting career news, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm transitioning from being head of strategy to head of future of work and workplace experience for Sodexo in Continental Europe. So, yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Congratulations and well-deserved. I'm excited to chat with you about it today. So tell me, maybe we start a little bit about Sodexo, because I think my guess is most people are somewhat familiar, but maybe at different levels of familiarity. So maybe you can explain a little bit more about Sodexo and the history and what the company does, just so people can get a little bit more familiar.
Sure. It was started during the 60s in France, and it has been growing super fast. We are today over 400,000 employees, and it's stock listed but family owned. Huge company, and we do facilities management, we do food and valuable experiences for companies, schools, hospitals, you name it.
At 400,000 plus employees, it has to make Sodexo one of the larger companies or employers globally, I would imagine.
Yeah. When I checked last time, I think it's the 18th largest company. Yeah.
So 18th largest company is like pretty large company. So the history of the company spans, it sounds like 6 decades or so now. Yeah. I imagine the last 10 years has been a particularly interesting chapter. Maybe tell me a little bit about how you found Sodexo in some of the early time, especially pre-pandemic, and what the business was like.
Sure. I'm celebrating 20 years this year, 2024, in the workplace industry or the facilities management industry. And I've been having a few different roles. I started in Johnson Controls, which became CBRE after a while. I've been working in operations. I've been doing Lean Six Sigma type of work, corporate development work. Then I stepped over to Ernst & Young and did global management consulting on big complex deals in outsourcing within the food and facilities management market, doing everything from corporate analysis of different competitors, doing the whole negotiation for clients globally. And at that time, I was part of doing one of the first vested strategic partner deals in the world, which also still is one of the most complex, where Sodexo kind of was selected in that one when I worked at Ernst & Young. So that was when I really got the insight into this fantastic company, Sodexo.
And that was, and so you joined Sodexo in, is it 2018? Am I remembering correctly?
2018, yeah. So since then, I've been working for Sodexo, heading up business development, marketing, and lately strategy for Continental Europe for 3.5 years. And now stepping into this future work-oriented role where I'm doing ambassador, brand ambassador work, having really deep conversations with the senior leadership at our clients, focusing a lot on innovation, building new services, combining startups with our own capabilities, really trying to figure out new business models, how to become more relevant and flexible for our clients.
It's a particularly interesting moment to be thinking about innovation for Sodexo and for clients, right? Because it's been quite the chapter, I imagine, over the last 5-6 years for the company. The first 2 years, I imagine, probably look a lot different or felt a lot different than the last 4. Take me through a little bit what it's been like at Sodexo in those, especially pre-pandemic, and then when the pandemic hit, what happened?
Since I've been in this industry for 20 years, I really see a vast difference today compared to like 10 years ago, and especially the pandemic made a huge difference. I remember one day quite early in the pandemic where I sat down with our CEO and he said, "Henrik, I think this pandemic will change our industry irreversibly. It will change the real estate industry irreversibly as well, and the services that needs to be done to all of the companies that have offices. So I want you to dig really deep, Henrik, and figure out how to understand how this movement evolves, everything around it. Are there any different behaviors on client sides? What would companies do when it comes to different places of work going forward? What are the preferences? What is working? What is not working?" So obviously that's pretty big lift to do, but we did a lot of surveys. We wrote quite many white papers. We were out there in webinars, really talking to companies all the time. And pretty quickly, I think we were one of the first to really have a pretty good idea on how it will play out. Although nobody knows exactly yet, but we've been really investing in the topic.
So as you got into that, I imagine it's an incredibly complex piece of research to run, because Sodexo doesn't operate just in one country or one market. You operate around the world. And at that moment, the pandemic had led to dramatically different regulatory and kind of like local policy schemes. You're seeing different rates of return to office by industry and by market. And so how did you even take that on or start to kind of like think about in a holistic way what the impact is for the business?
Yeah, as you say, it's a pretty big question because you want to do it data-based, and you want to move away from opinion as fast as you can, because there is so much opinion around this item, depending on who you ask, which survey you listen to, which statistic analysis you look at. You get different messages. So we have a global team running these services in collaboration with consultants in different aspects. Because as you say, I think we now operate in 60 countries over the world, and this question is not similar everywhere. Most of it, anyone can relate to working from home, or anyone can relate to hybrid work, but it's also named different in different countries. Some countries call it smart work, some call it teleworking, and also the understanding on what it is differs. And then if you think about it as well, I think we can deliver around 100 different types of services to companies. But mostly we do sustainable food and valuable experiences, and then you add all of these facilities management services that are, on the table, what client want us to do. And obviously everything changes from day one. That day when I sat down with the CEO, drastically, we have a pretty huge revenue, but in the past we were paid transactionally for having people doing work on the client side, either cooking food or cleaning their offices or being receptionists or doing property maintenance work or these kind of things. So that obviously dropped when people were not in the office quite fast. So we really had to figure out from that perspective as well, how do our services change when this whole environment changes? That was exciting.
It's a particularly interesting question. And I imagine it's a tough cultural question too, in that you had to have, I mean, I'm guessing you must have had elements within the company that were kind of like pushing against this potential change and trying or hoping that it would revert back to the way things were, which is, to your point, a much more predictable type of operation, versus others who were thinking about, okay, well, maybe the world is changing in the way that you described the conversation, and we need to skate to where the puck is going, so to speak. Yeah. So how did you even drive internal alignment around getting a kind of like where you're going to focus and even how you speak publicly on this topic, given the impact of business?
Yeah, I love a good Wayne Gretzky quote. Thank you very much. I use it very often myself, skate where the puck is going. And I guess that really paints the picture, because you do like what you know. What you don't know can be quite scary sometimes. But if you look at it, it is a global movement that cannot be stopped because it is adopted everywhere, and hybrid work is here to stay. But as you say, the internal dialogue can be tough sometimes. Should we just promote trying to give as much as we can to get people back into the offices? Yes, it's a good idea for the revenue. But if you really want to own the whole problem statement, you really need to understand the movement. So gradually, step by step, we have, of course, internally educated ourselves on what the future work may be. It's a continuous work, and it's, according to myself, it has only already started. We're in the beginning of a big revolution, or really transformation in this industry.
And if you think about what that means in practice for how your business operates, and I know that's probably an overly simple question for like a very complex business, but what has the conversation been like with customers and shifting away from things that are more variabilized to the person, or have you tried to shift away from that to create more continuity in the business? Like it's a much more dynamic environment that I imagine impacts a bunch of different business lines in terms of the way you think about pricing and allocating the right amount of staff relative to what's happening on site. Like it's a slightly more variable world in that regard.
Yep. Yes, it is. And I love the work that you do with Flex Index. It has helped me a lot to have this conversation internally, because what we see through statistics like yours, for example, is that there are more or less 3 buckets of different clients that we see right now. You have one bucket is the companies who really want to do the back to office policy, and then in the middle you have the largest one with hybrid work, and then you have the digital first companies. So the dialogues I have with senior leaders are all over this place. So I guess that's different. The vantage point I have, I see all of these things that are in play at the same time, and obviously we need to adapt to whichever of these 3. So we need to learn all of these games. For a real estate executive on a company that maybe have chosen a hybrid policy and hybrid way of working, then that's one model. But we have as many ways of working as we have clients, and that's thousands. We work with most of the largest organizations of this world, really supporting them from a workplace perspective of creating great experiences. And there are different discussions in every leadership team meeting I have. The other week, for example, a question arose. So how can we flatten out the curve of the amount of people in the office throughout the week? Is it good to monitor our employees to figure out, for example, so we can get an even distribution throughout the week, so we don't have the Wednesday mountain, for example. So that's one, a few examples of discussions that come up. Then you have the really companies in the forefront. They have figured it out, and they are gradually taking steps to harvest all of the benefits from flexible work. So I think you really have to be respectful. You really have to be aware that very few have figured this out fully, and just work with it in the given situation for the given company that you have, because they are all different. There is no blueprint. And so I guess that's part of the answer. You asked as well, how we work then from our perspective with our services and understanding. Yeah, obviously, the part of doing more type of consultative work for our clients is there, because a lot of organizations, they want help with figuring out, for example, utilization. And utilization, yeah, that has always been a topic interesting for the FM or food industry as well, because that gives us information about how to staff, how to run our full supply chain and these kind of things. But especially since the pandemic, utilization is a top metric to understand, because if you know that, you can really become efficient. You can plan much better in advance, for example. So yeah, great question. It's not a simple one.
No, difficult. It's not. I mean, what's interesting to me is it sounds like, if I'm understanding correctly, that while you've always, I imagine, had a really strong partnership orientation with clients and customers based on the way you talk about it, it's becoming more consultative, it sounds like. Are executives coming to you and asking for your or Sodexo's point of view on policy or how to implement these things? Like, is that an area that you're finding that Sodexo needs to have some expertise in terms of how to support C-level questions on this topic?
Absolutely. And this is also why I think my CEO was right 3.5-4 years ago when we sat down, because we want to be able to do more consultative work because we can provide more value when we do that. Before, for the last 25 years, this has been an RFP rich environment, contract by contract, just answering the cost for providing 3 services or 30 in one country or 14. But now that's changing. And I particularly think it's super interesting because I was also one of the first pioneering the business model of Vested, which is a strategic win-win methodology that is highly relational, where you really team up and in a trust-based manner solve the most difficult topics in your relationship. And I think this is the way that this industry is moving, because if utilization changes really fast, if you really, for example, downsizing your office footprint fast, you can't have the same rigid contract anymore because you have much more flexible contracts running it together. You can't no longer have the same contract terms for 3 years and then maybe add 2. I think you need to have a shorter view, renew to be able to keep the contract relevant. So I think that is important. And I love the question. Not many see that immediately.
It's a fundamentally different operating model, right? Like longer term agreements that are more fixed and predictable in nature versus shorter, that turnover. I mean, it changes the staffing and the way you train your people and how they support those conversations around renewal in a pretty meaningful way.
Yeah. So I was super happy when I understood what you're doing with Flex Index, because if I can have one source of information where I can see in a market vertical how peers are working, what kind of policy do they have in place, how many square meters, how many sites, it's a golden data for people like me to understand that. Because if you compare it to only providing, let's say we have 600 people working for 2 sites for one client, and they did the same stuff Monday to Friday. Now, today, it's big work on Wednesdays. Mondays and Fridays, they're pretty much dead. How can we then plan for that? Because we need to be able to plan for it. We need to be adaptable. So having data and really understanding that is key, because you can't do the guesswork day by day, week by week. It will not be good.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I can hear your passion for the topic, come through, and the way you talk about it has clearly become something that's a big part of your life. I'm curious, is there something personally that happened to you that made this topic become so important, or what caused you to connect with it in such a personal way?
I think over the years, 20 years now in this industry, we have been trying to figure out new ways to create more value. At least over the time I was a consultant, and now I'm on the supplier side, because there has been signs of commoditization, really, knowing the price per service, per hour, per square meter, whatever it can be. How can we find the next type of overhaul lane to create much more value? So again, the movement with new business models like Vested, for example, is one step and one part of why I think this is super interesting. And this big bang and global movement of the pandemic actually helps to create more value, because it opens up so many more opportunities. People work in different places. They work from home. They work from flex offices. They work in offices, of course. And I think looking at it from a fixed pie perspective is what the industry has been doing before. Now it's a never-ending pie. Nobody owns the full space, and I really love the part of innovating, figuring out how this industry will be moving forward. So absolutely, my passion at heart, providing more and more good ideas for it. So it's a good situation to be in.
I love the way you frame that. How have you ended up finding it working for you personally? Have you found yourself going into an office most days, or has it been a mix of spaces? Like, what does your life look like in this kind of like more flexible world?
Yeah, I've been working flexibly since 2004. I was sitting with these conference calls. Probably you did. I don't know if you did. You're younger than me, but you put in this 30-digit number and you get music and you listen and you call in. We started working flexibly already then. But I think what is happening now is that, a lot of companies, they have adopted hybrid as a policy. But the thing is, they are not working accordingly to harvest all of the benefits. So I usually try to describe it like, okay, companies have lifted the old school way of working in offices and added digital screens. Not much more has been done. And this is why I think we are really early in this phase.
It makes me wonder, and it's interesting because I come out of Bain, is where I started my career. You spent some time at Ernst & Young and in consulting, and obviously in quite a consultative role right now. To your point, in some ways, I kind of think of professional services firms or consulting firms as, in many ways, like the original pioneers in some ways of kind of like more hybrid-esque ways of working. It just used to be between office and client site more than like between home or another kind of like remote space, if you will. And so I wonder if there's like a certain ease or familiarity or an adoption for folks who have come out of that background in some ways versus others who have not really had that type of experience.
I think it is. And what is also equally cool to think about is that what I see now when talking to professional services firms is that they are very intentionally building this hybrid policy and hybrid way of working, new operating model. They're investing in great spaces, because the thing is, the office is not dead. It is just going to become so much better. So many better experiences, and really provide what you need to stay as productive as you want. So most of the consulting companies I talk to, they have people coming in because they love being in the office. They have built something with tools, with behaviors, with amenities, and what they quote being the most important thing is the vibe, meeting with all of the peers, because that really strengthens their culture, their belonging to the brand that they chose to join a few years ago. So I would say many of these professional services firms, they are in the absolute forefront of this, because they've been exercising it for so many years, but now finally, more value is being built in and greater experiences, and really figuring this out. Because professional services firms are also, I would say, they have a pretty young demography in the organization. So I think that also has something to do with it. they love to meet up. They need to meet up to learn, to get to know each other, to see how things are working and getting into your role and these kind of things. So I think it's a great example.
I think you're right. And I think I remember back to the concept of when you start at a firm like that and there is a class of people who are similar to you and you kind of learn together and grow together. And that's different than if you're a 50-person startup, right? Like you're not hiring at that level of scale, or not all the same people in the same types of roles. And so I think there's also an element of that and that shared learning and experience.
Absolutely. Building a tribe, to use old word for it, but that is super important in these high performance cultures where hard work is done in many hours every day, and they need to have high performing teams. And I guess that's also part of it. Really getting to know how to figure out the best work in the fastest way you can, on deadline, doing all of these updates that probably you have done as a management consultant as well. This is update number 22.
Yes, absolutely. So, and I apologize for this question because maybe it's an unfair one since I know you're brand new in your future of work, kind of like new role and opportunity. But have you thought about what success looks like for you, and where do you want to be 6 months, a year, 2 years, or where does Sodexo need to be, as you think about this topic and your roadmap for it?
That's a good question, Rob. You'll get to know me better through that question, because what I do, I perceive the world, and what I do, I create that step by step. I have never known what I want to become, but I build it and I adapt and I figure out as I go, because I think that's what fits me. So, for example, over the last years, I've invested a lot in understanding people who are the people that are the best on the future work topic. I can't remember how long ago I hooked up and started following you on LinkedIn, and then following Flex Index. The same with the guys like Phil Kirshner, Brian Elliott, Dave Cairns. All of these people I've been building a network and peer relationship with, and I think that's one of the absolute most important things for me, to grow this peer network and figure out how I can extract ideas and values for my role at Sodexo, and building on that. Of course, being part of creating a new industry, because I do think new types of needs, I know that they exist out there at our clients, at these big companies. But how do you solve these services? How do you build these services? I think that's super inspiring to think about. Like almost like a corporate venture, fast Lego building thing with services. I know our capabilities, but I also know that we will need to figure out sustainable or circular furniture management. I know that we will need to figure out how to help most clients downsizing of offices, because this has already started. But how can I do that without taking a couple of years of developing these services in-house, but really building solutions with smaller, fast-moving companies? That's in the core of my passion and interest.
Is that consistent with how Sodexo has operated traditionally? Is Sodexo, some companies are very good partners, and have an ecosystem around what it means to partner with small firms and think about how to complement their own capabilities. Some have if it's not built here, then we're not interested type of mentality around it. And so is Sodexo always been kind of more oriented toward what it means to build an ecosystem, or is that a newer evolution in some ways in terms of the way you think about solving some of these challenges?
I think Sodexo is pretty much like any other large company. They have mostly been focusing throughout the years, the last decades, on how to solve and innovate in-house. Some companies, of course, they buy consulting services to figure out small parts and these kind of things. But something happened 7 to 8 years ago where we, for example, we started having a startup accelerator program to find small, promising startups that have an idea that is really connects to our strategic priorities. So let's say, for example, figuring out how to make our food services more sustainable. Can we find someone to work with, figure out menu planning, someone who can nudge people to take smarter choices when they pick from the menu every day? These type of things started 7 to 8 years ago, where we now have a long list of different startups as alumni. And we have this program in different parts of the world. So I guess that follows most other global companies as well, because I see that everywhere, that you need to do collaboration with smaller, faster companies to get innovation to market in a speed no one has seen. So that's the only way forward, I think.
And it's a refreshing perspective, I think, broadly, the idea that no one's got the answer. And I think it's actually an important topic, not just as a vendor or as a supplier to customers, but I think even within organizations, one of the things that I think a lot of companies have made mistakes with over time is saying, hey, look, we know the answer, and the answer for our company is X, and that's what it's going to be, and have had to walk that back or adjust, and it can be uncomfortable, versus the companies that have taken more of a, hey, we're gonna put something out and we're gonna learn and iterate and adapt. It seems like have ended up finding healthier ground on kind of like this fast moving topic in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's also one of the really exciting things with a huge organization like Sodexo, because most people don't know that we do kind of a Michelin-starred restaurant in the top of the Eiffel Tower. Right now, we are managing the world's biggest kitchen during the Olympics, serving all of the Olympians, at the same time as we are providing, school food to smaller schools in every country. And that mix of different areas, of different levels of service, different things, really has lived in Sodexo forever, since the 60s when it was started. Try out new things, now try out new pockets of value, new growth pockets. Let's try it. And if it doesn't work, we know that. But you can't end up in an analysis paralysis situation where you just analyze and don't do anything.
Right. Which is a common, it's funny, coming out of consulting, I feel like my aversion to that or fear of that is substantially higher than maybe is
I recognize
rational.
that.
Yeah, totally. Right. As ex-consultants, we feel that. So maybe a question for you, as you think about the future, you have such an interesting seat in that, as both your work and what you've done personally in your networking, but also as Sodexo and the number and varied nature of the clients, as you're describing. Do you have a sense or a point of view yet on where we're headed? Like, do you think that we're going to see a certain type of hybrid work policy or kind of like a certain type of office usage pattern materialize? Do you think it's going to be highly variable? I'm curious, like, what you're seeing and feeling from all the discussions that you're in right now.
I think I have a pretty good idea what we see right now. And if you look at our larger clients, a lot of them have now started to understand their utilization, because they didn't really care before the pandemic. But now more and more companies are understanding how their offices are being used. Most of the time, it's, utilization level is between 30 and 60%, which means that on average, more or less half of the space stands unused. And when people come into a sea of free seating and not many in the office, that doesn't really create a great vibe. So the best companies that I'm working with and giving advice, they are right-sizing the space, and they are investing much more into that space to make it great, to make it count for people to be able and willing to travel in. Because that's the number one thing people don't like, and that's all of the traveling back and forth to the office. So I'm thinking that the clear picture I have in mind is the future of the office is a place for building culture. No longer is it enough to just provide a feeling for the brand, but the culture must be a place where, an office where culture is built. Collaboration, face-to-face collaboration, super important. And as I alluded to earlier, most hybrid leaders or hybrid company policy leaders that I'm talking to, there are so many frustrations because of this thing that they only have lifted the old school way of working into a digital environment. All of their calendars, day by day, they are absolutely back-to-back filled. So there is something that is not working. So hybrid work is currently not working. But that's the thing we also are figuring out now step by step. The office will be a place to collaborate and build culture, but you also have to change the way you're working. And that is the big crux at the moment.
Yeah, and I think there's an open question still for a lot of companies, which is if we have a clear point of view for what we want the office to be, how do you align calendar, the way you spend your time so that you do the right activities in the office and you don't do you don't spend the day on Teams or on Zoom all day when you're in the office, which I think it's a simple question, but it's a hard answer, especially in large, complex organizations in terms of how do you actually execute the work.
Yeah, and again, I use Flex Index data again to talk about these three buckets. If you look at the return to the past or the return to office companies that are trying to fill their offices again, like they did before, they are considering to go a bit more flexible. The hybrid work companies, they are trying to make hybrid work because it doesn't. And the digital first ones, like the Atlassians of this world, I heard when I was watching, what's her name? I will get Annie Dean in Portugal, and it was a fantastic presentation because she said we have learned how to become digital first, but we have also learned that we need to get together more often. So this movement of epic meetings for people or in companies who are digital first is a big thing. So there are three different movements on how you utilize the office, but the office is not dead. It's just the thing that we need to invest much more in it to make it great.
I love that. We covered a lot of ground. Any final thoughts, topics that we didn't touch on that are particularly important to you or things that we should have covered that maybe we missed?
No, I think the world is becoming a better place when we are talking about work. Many people are enjoying their lives more and more. They have more balance. They have been given the freedom to work where they want and sometimes when they want. And I think this is important. This is a global movement that cannot be stopped. You really need to understand it and play with it. Can't go against it. I think that's my last addition to this. Yeah,
I love that, and it's such an important point and a momentous comment from someone who is working so closely with companies from within one of the largest employers in the world, right? Which kind of reflects the relative importance of this topic, both locally to you, but also globally to you and your customers. So I appreciate the sentiment. For folks that have enjoyed this conversation and want to learn more about you or read anything you might be writing or thinking about, where would you send them?
I would send them to my LinkedIn profile. I'm trying to do good content, engaging content, and just follow along and make a contact request. Give me a call.
Awesome. Look, I really enjoyed the conversation. Congratulations on your new role. I'm super excited for you. And I think what you were pushing and thinking through and the way that Sodexo is thinking through this is super important. So I'm excited to see kind of where that goes for Sodexo and for many clients over the coming years. Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you for letting me be part of this fantastic pod. It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please also consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that helps other listeners find the podcast. For more Flex Index content, including past episodes, our Flex Index newsletter, and monthly research reports, visit flex.scoopforwork.com. See you next time.